In an ordinary home in modern Istanbul lives a man who, in another version of history, might have ruled an empire. His name is Harun Osmanoğlu. He is the great-grandson of Sultan Abdülhamid II and the senior living male of the dynasty that governed territories across Europe, Asia, and Africa for more than 6 centuries. But there are no guards outside his door, no ministers awaiting his commands, and no throne for him to inherit. The man, sometimes described as the Ottoman heir, lives as a private citizen of the Republic that replaced his family's empire. The explanation begins on 1st November 1922, when Turkey's Grand National Assembly abolished the Ottoman Sultanate. 2 years later, the dynasty was expelled from the country and scattered across the world. Princes who had grown up surrounded by servants suddenly needed passports, salaries, and foreign benefactors. Some became musicians, salesmen, and businessmen. Others survived by selling the few possessions they had carried into exile. When Harun was born in Damascus in 1932, the imperial title attached to his name no longer provided a palace, an income, or even permission to enter his ancestral homeland. Today, Harun is recognized within dynastic tradition as the head of the House of Osman, but that position grants him no legal authority, state funding, or political role. Whatever duties remain are largely familial and symbolic, representing the continuity of the bloodline, attending commemorations, and preserving the memory of a world that disappeared before most living people were born. His life therefore reveals a more intriguing story than the fantasy of restoring the Ottoman throne. What actually happens to an imperial family after its empire is abolished, its property is taken away, and its descendants are forced to become ordinary citizens? 1. A throne that no longer legally exists. On 1st November 1922, the Ottoman throne did not fall during a battle or disappear beneath the ruins of a captured palace. It was eliminated by a vote. Inside the Grand National Assembly in Ankara, deputies declared that sovereignty belonged to the nation and abolished the sultanate that had governed the Ottoman state for more than 6 centuries. Sultan Mehmed VI was still alive. The imperial family still occupied its residences, and Istanbul still carried the symbols of dynastic rule. But with a legislative decision, the title of sultan ceased to be a recognized political office. There could be descendants of Ottoman rulers after that moment, but legally there could no longer be an Ottoman sovereign. This was more than the removal of a single monarch. Under the empire, membership in the House of Osman determined a person's place within the state. Princes were potential rulers, princesses participated in dynastic marriages, and senior members received residences, allowances, and ceremonial privileges. Their identity was inseparable from the political system surrounding them. Once the sultanate was abolished, this structure lost its legal foundation. A prince might remain a prince according to family tradition, but the republic no longer owed him a palace, an income, or a place in government. The dynasty's titles survived in private memory, while their authority disappeared from public law. For a brief period, however, the break was incomplete. The Turkish Republic was proclaimed in October 1923, but Abdülmecid II remained in Istanbul as caliph. He possessed no sovereign power, yet his presence allowed the dynasty to retain a visible institution, a court, and an international religious profile. Visitors continued to approach him as a major figure in the Muslim world, creating the impression that an alternative center of loyalty still existed beside the Republican government in Ankara. To the new leadership, this ambiguity represented a political risk. A dynasty stripped of its throne might still become a rallying point for opponents of the Republic. The decisive rupture arrived on 3rd March 1924. Law No. 431 abolished the caliphate and ordered members of the Ottoman dynasty to leave Turkish territory. Those covered by the law were deprived of Turkish citizenship and forbidden to reside in the Republic. The measure reached beyond Abdülmecid himself. Princes, princesses, and other specified members of the imperial household were placed outside the political community that had replaced their empire. The state was not merely dismissing the last caliph, it was removing the entire family as a possible institution, ensuring that no Ottoman relative could remain in Turkey and become the center of a competing claim to authority. The transition from royalty to exile happened with extraordinary speed. Abdülmecid was informed of the decision during the night and departed by train, while other family members were given only a limited period to leave. They traveled toward Switzerland, France, Egypt, Lebanon, and other destinations, carrying whatever money, jewelry, and portable possessions they could manage. Their relationship with imperial residences and crown-associated property ended, while disputes over personal property and inheritance would continue for years. The family that had once controlled the resources of an empire now faced passports, borders, hotel bills, and the uncertain generosity of relatives and foreign patrons. Exile also exposed a distinction that palace life had concealed. A dynastic title was not a profession. Many family members had been educated for ceremonial or military roles within an imperial system that no longer existed. Outside Turkey, they had to find practical ways to survive. Some sold jewelry and personal possessions. Others worked as musicians, clerks, merchants, drivers, or salesmen. Marriages connected some descendants to other royal or wealthy families, but many experienced financial insecurity. The change was not simply from luxury to reduced circumstances. It was a transformation from people whose status had been guaranteed by the state into individuals responsible for earning their own livelihoods. The Republic continued dismantling the social language of the old order. The surname law of 1934 required Turkish citizens to adopt hereditary surnames, replacing many titles and forms of identification inherited from Ottoman society. Members and descendants of the former dynasty became widely known as Osmanoğlu, son of Osman. The name preserved their connection to the founder of the house, but it did not restore their former privileges. Sultan and Şehzade could still be used by relatives, admirers, or historians, yet they carried no official authority. In legal terms, an Osmanoğlu returning to Turkey would stand before the state as an individual, not as a prince entitled to rule. The restrictions were eventually relaxed. Female members of the dynasty were permitted to return in the early 1950s, while male members had to wait until the 1970s. Those who returned could recover or obtain Turkish citizenship and live in the country, but only as private citizens. This is the legal world inherited by Harun Osmanoğlu, today regarded by dynastic convention as head of the House of Osman. His position may carry historical meaning within the family, but it creates no constitutional rights, public duties, or claim recognized by the Turkish state. The Ottoman succession survives as genealogy. The Ottoman throne survives as memory. Republican law transformed the heirs of an empire into citizens precisely by ensuring that neither ancestry nor title could place them above the Republic. 2. Harun Osmanoğlu, the quiet head of the family. For centuries, the arrival of a new Ottoman sultan transformed Istanbul into a theater of power. Officials pledged allegiance, cannons announced the succession, foreign ambassadors waited for audiences, and the new ruler traveled to the Eyüp Sultan Mosque to be girded with the sword of Osman. When Harun Osmanoğlu became head of the same dynasty in January 2021, none of this happened. There was no accession ceremony, no imperial proclamation, and no procession through the former capital. The position passed to him quietly after the death of his elder brother, Dündar. Outside the family and a relatively small circle interested in Ottoman history, daily life in Turkey continued unchanged. Harun had been born far from the palaces associated with his ancestors. He entered the world in 1932 in Damascus, 8 years after the Ottoman dynasty was expelled from Turkey. By then, the sultanate and caliphate had both been abolished. The family had lost its privileged legal position, and its members were dispersed across several countries. Harun was not born inside an imperial household preparing him for public duties. He was born into exile, carrying a famous lineage, but possessing none of the institutions that had once supported it. His earliest experience of the Ottoman name was therefore not sovereignty, but displacement. His ancestry nevertheless placed him close to the empire's final political struggles. Harun's great-grandfather was Sultan Abdulhamid II, one of the most controversial and consequential rulers of the late Ottoman period. Abdulhamid had governed from Yildiz Palace, maintained an enormous intelligence network, and presented himself as caliph to Muslims far beyond the empire's borders. Harun inherited the family connection to that world, but not its protection. His father, Mehmed Abdulkarim, died in 1935, when Harun was still a small child. His grandfather died 2 years later, leaving Harun and his elder brother to grow up under the care of their mother. That childhood offers the sharpest contrast with the traditional upbringing of an Ottoman prince. Earlier, Shehzadis could receive instruction from tutors, religious scholars, military officers, and palace officials. Their education reflected the possibility, however uncertain or dangerous, that one of them might eventually rule. Harun grew up knowing that no such future existed. There was no province for him to govern, no court position awaiting him, and no imperial treasury financing his preparation. The skills required of his generation were those of survival in exile, adapting to another country, maintaining family connections, and building an ordinary life without the machinery of the state behind them. In 1974, after Turkey relaxed the restrictions that had kept male members of the dynasty abroad, Harun and his family moved to Istanbul. The return carried enormous symbolic weight. A male descendant of Abdulhamid II could once again live in the former Ottoman capital, walk past the palaces of his ancestors, and visit the tombs of the dynasty. Yet the legal terms of his return were unmistakable. He entered Turkey not as a prince recovering an inheritance, but as a private person permitted to reside within a republic. The palaces had become museums or state property. The imperial offices had disappeared, and the population owed him no political allegiance. Harun's elevation to head of the House of Osman came almost half a century after that return. It resulted from the family's traditional principle of seniority, under which leadership passes to the oldest eligible male member. But head of the house is not equivalent to sultan. Harun signs no laws, appoints no ministers, and receives no official income because of his ancestry. His position is primarily genealogical and symbolic. It identifies the senior representative of a dispersed family whose members live in Turkey, Europe, the Middle East, and the United States. The succession continues, but the sovereign authority that once gave it political meaning does not. The limited public record surrounding Harun is itself revealing. He has occasionally attended family ceremonies, memorial occasions, religious visits, and meetings with local representatives. He is also identified as a founding figure connected with a family association, while younger relatives maintain a more visible presence through charitable work, interviews, and social media. Harun, however, has not constructed the kind of public court maintained by some descendants of deposed European monarchies. There is no shadow government waiting around him, and no recognized royal household issuing commands in his name. His role is closer to that of a respected family elder than a monarch in exile. An Ottoman sultan once stood at the center of an immense ceremonial universe designed to make authority visible. Clothing, architecture, processions, audiences, and carefully regulated gestures reminded everyone of the distance between the sovereign and his subjects. Harun's quiet life reverses that image. His historical importance comes precisely from the absence of those things. No throne room, no imperial guard, and no state ritual separating him from other citizens. He carries one of history's most recognizable dynastic names, yet lives under the same republican law as everyone around him. The contrast does not show a sultan waiting to return. It shows how completely an empire can disappear while the human family at its center continues to live. 3. How do you choose an heir when there is no throne? The question appears simple. If Harun Osmanoglu is the head of the Ottoman dynasty, who is his heir? But every word in that question carries a different legal and historical meaning. An heir succeeds to something that still exists. A crown prince waits to inherit a recognized office. A claimant argues that an abolished or occupied throne rightfully belongs to him. The head of a deposed house, by contrast, may lead a family without demanding political power at all. Confusing these roles creates the illusion that an Ottoman government survives somewhere in the shadows, patiently maintaining a line of succession. In reality, only the genealogy continues. For much of Ottoman history, succession was not governed by the familiar European rule of primogeniture, in which the eldest son automatically inherited the crown. Sovereignty was understood as belonging to the wider male dynasty. When a sultan died, several of his sons could possess plausible paths to power. Princes governed provinces, cultivated military and political supporters, and prepared to move rapidly toward the capital when the throne became vacant. The successor was often the prince capable of defeating or outmaneuvering his brothers. Choosing the next ruler was therefore not merely a family matter. It could become a struggle, whose outcome determined the survival of the state. This uncertainty produced some of the dynasty's most brutal practices. Victorious sultans could order the execution of their brothers to prevent rival courts, rebellions, and civil war. The policy was defended as a means of protecting public order, but it made every succession potentially lethal. Beginning in the 17th century, the system gradually moved towards seniority. Instead of passing automatically from father to son, the throne increasingly went to the oldest eligible male member of the House of Osman. A dead sultan might be succeeded by his brother or nephew rather than by his own child. Seniority reduced one form of competition, although it introduced new problems of confinement, age, and political inexperience. By the final decades of the empire, this principle had acquired a clearer constitutional form. Article 3 of the Ottoman Constitution of 1876 placed sovereignty in the eldest prince of the House of Osman, according to the dynasty's established rules. The senior eligible prince could therefore be recognized as veliaht, or heir to the sultanate. He occupied an official position because an Ottoman state, a reigning sultan, and a legally recognized throne still existed. When Sultan Abdulhamid II ruled, for example, the identity of the next dynastic successor mattered to ministers, diplomats, and military commanders. A change at the top could redirect the policies of an empire. That is what distinguishes a crown prince from a modern Osmanoglu family member. A crown prince is not simply a relative who appears first on a genealogical chart. He is the officially recognized successor within an operating monarchy. His status is created by the constitutional or dynastic law of a state, and his future accession can carry consequences for government, diplomacy, and national security. Turkey abolished the Ottoman Sultanate in 1922. Because the office no longer exists, the Republic has no Ottoman crown prince. A family may preserve the old order of seniority, but it cannot by itself recreate the public institution that once made the next man in line an official heir. A claimant, or pretender, is different again. This is someone who asserts that a throne rightfully belongs to him despite another government, dynasty, or political system controlling the country. Historical claimants have issued declarations, adopted regnal titles, organized courts in exile, or supported movements seeking restoration. Mere descent is not enough. A person can possess an impeccable royal genealogy without claiming any right to govern. Harun Osmanoglu is frequently described by the media as an heir to the Ottoman throne, but he is not known for maintaining an active campaign to replace the Turkish Republic or proclaiming himself sultan. Calling him a claimant therefore suggests a political ambition that his family position alone does not prove. Head of the House of Osman is the more accurate description. It identifies Harun as the senior male representative of the dynasty, according to the traditional principle of agnatic seniority. The position can carry importance at family gatherings, funerals, marriages, and commemorative events. It can also provide a reference point for genealogists attempting to determine who belongs to the historical dynasty. But the title comes from family convention rather than Turkish constitutional law. It gives Harun no territory, subjects, diplomatic recognition, or authority over citizens. Even his influence over other descendants depends more on personal respect than enforceable command. When Harun dies, the headship would, under the commonly followed dynastic order, pass to the next eligible senior male, not necessarily to Harun's eldest son. That transition may be recorded in genealogies and acknowledged by members of the family, but it will not trigger a Turkish constitutional process. No parliament must approve it, no public official must swear allegiance, and no state institution will transfer power. This is the central paradox of Ottoman succession today. The family can still answer who comes next, but not what that person would inherit. The order remains precise, while its former political destination, the throne itself, has disappeared. 4. What does the dynasty's head actually do? There is no official job description for the head of the House of Osman. Harun Osmanoglu does not begin his day by reviewing state papers, receiving ambassadors, or approving appointments. His position exists within a family rather than a government, so its functions become most visible during moments that bring relatives together. Weddings, funerals, memorial prayers, religious gatherings, and visits connected with Ottoman history. At such events, Harun's importance comes from seniority. His presence links younger descendants, many born decades after the empire disappeared, to the generation shaped directly by exile and return. Within these gatherings, the head of the dynasty resembles a respected patriarch more than a sovereign. Relatives may accord him precedence, seek his blessing, or present him to guests as the senior representative of the family. This respect is social and voluntary. Harun possesses no court capable of enforcing obedience. He cannot determine where relatives live, whom they marry, or what careers they pursue. His authority depends upon age, ancestry, and the willingness of other family members to recognize the old order of seniority. What survives is therefore not royal command, but a form of ceremonial respect familiar to many extended families. Weddings provide one of the clearest examples. When Harun's descendants marry, family members gather from different branches and countries, sometimes attracting media attention because of their ancestry. Harun may occupy a prominent place as the eldest dynast and grandfather, while relatives continue to use traditional forms such as Shehzad for male descendants and sultan for certain women of the dynasty. Yet the marriage itself is conducted under modern civil law. Harun does not grant dynastic permission with legal force, and the ceremony creates no political alliance between states. An event that once might have carried diplomatic consequences has become a family celebration layered with historical symbolism. Funerals and memorial prayers carry an even deeper significance. The Ottoman family's exile scattered graves across France, Syria, Egypt, Britain, the United States, and other countries. Some descendants died far from Istanbul and could not be buried near their ancestors. When relatives now assemble for a funeral or commemorative prayer, they are doing more than mourning one person. They are reconnecting branches separated by migration and political upheaval. Harun has appeared at such ceremonies with his wife, children, and other descendants, including a prayer gathering held within the historic Yildiz Palace complex. The former imperial setting becomes a place of memory rather than government. Religious observance also offers the family a language of continuity. Gatherings during Ramadan, prayer ceremonies, and visits to respected religious figures reflect both personal faith and the dynasty's historical identification with Sunni Islam. In the imperial period, the sultan's religious role was inseparable from political authority, particularly after Ottoman rulers claimed the caliphate. Harun possesses no comparable office. When he attends a mosque or religious gathering, he does so as a Muslim and a descendant of the dynasty, not as a caliph leading the Islamic world. The ceremony may evoke the past, but it does not restore the powers once attached to it. Preserving family memory is another informal responsibility. A dynasty dispersed across generations needs genealogies, photographs, letters, and oral accounts to understand how its branches connect. Names reused across the family, Mehmed, Selim, Abdulhamid, Orhan, and others, also transmit historical identity to descendants who grew up speaking different languages in different countries. As the senior family member, Harun embodies part of that record. His life connects Damascus, the decades of exile, and the family's return to Istanbul in 1974. But he is not a legal registrar of nobility. His recognition may matter inside the family without compelling the Turkish state to acknowledge a title. Some of this preservation has moved beyond private ceremonies into organized civil society. Harun is identified as a founding president of the Osmanolu Charitable Association, while younger relatives perform much of its visible administration and public activity. The organization presents humanitarian assistance as a modern expression of the family's inherited sense of social responsibility. This resembles an old ideal of dynastic patronage, but its legal structure is entirely republican. It operates as an association, not an imperial foundation controlled by a palace. Donations replace taxation, volunteers replace court officials, and public cooperation replaces commands issued in a ruler's name. The dynasty's head therefore performs his role through presence rather than power. He attends, remembers, represents, and gives a sense of continuity to ceremonies that might otherwise appear to be ordinary family events. Not every custom practiced by the Osmanolus is an unchanged survival from the imperial court. Many are modern adaptations shaped by exile, citizenship, and contemporary Turkish life. That distinction is essential. Harun does not preserve a functioning monarchy. He helps preserve the relationships, memories, and symbols of a family that once embodied one, and whose ceremonies now reveal how royal identity can survive after royal authority has vanished. 5. From imperial exile to ordinary employment. A prince selling pictures in an art gallery, another playing the violin to pay household expenses, a future head of the Ottoman dynasty shelving books in a New York library. These were not fictional reversals invented to dramatize the empire's collapse. They were consequences of a political decision that removed the dynasty's citizenship, residences, and state allowances almost overnight. In the Ottoman system, princes had been supported because they belonged to the machinery of government. In exile, the title Shehzad might inspire curiosity or respect, but it could not pay rent, purchase food, or guarantee employment. The economic collapse was not identical for every member of the family. Some carried jewelry or other valuables that could be sold, while a few received help from wealthy sympathizers, foreign rulers, or relatives connected to other royal houses. Others entered advantageous marriages or possessed education that could be adapted to a profession. But many discovered that assets associated with the dynasty were inaccessible, disputed, or no longer theirs to control. Their military ranks had been issued by a vanished state. Their courtly education had limited commercial value, and uncertain travel documents made crossing borders or finding stable work even more difficult. Shehzada Mehmed Abdul Qadir, a son of Sultan Abdulhamid II, illustrates the sudden change. He had been educated inside the palace and trained in music, becoming an accomplished pianist, violinist, and kemençe player. After the exile, he settled with his family in Budapest, where the money and portable valuables they possessed gradually disappeared. Music, once part of an aristocratic education, became a means of survival. Abdul Qadir reportedly earned money by playing violin in an orchestra. The instrument that had demonstrated refinement at court now helped place food on the table. Few lives capture the improvisation of exile more clearly than that of Shehzada Mehmed Orhan. A grandson of Abdulhamid II, Orhan moved through Europe, the Middle East, and South America while pursuing an extraordinary range of occupations. Accounts of his life describe him working in shipbuilding, selling pictures through an art gallery in Sao Paulo, driving taxis in Beirut and Damascus, and serving as a cemetery attendant in the United States. He also spent time as an advisor to Albania's King Zog. In 1983, after decades of unstable work, this former driver, salesman, and laborer became head of the House of Osman. Osman Bayezid Osmanoglu followed a quieter but equally revealing path. Born in Paris shortly after the dynasty's expulsion, he later settled in the United States, served in the American military, and worked for decades as a librarian in New York. His knowledge of several languages, an inheritance far more useful than a ceremonial title, helped him build a career in the library's foreign language collections. In 2009, he became the 44th head of the Ottoman House, the senior representative of a dynasty that had once governed imperial archives and schools, was now a retired public library employee living as an American citizen. Ertuğrul Osman, one of the last dynasty members born during the empire, adapted through international business. After studying in Vienna and Paris, he moved to New York and worked as a consultant connected with mining operations, traveling frequently to South America. His career was more comfortable than the lives of relatives who relied upon casual labor, yet it remained far removed from palace existence. For decades, he lived modestly in an apartment above a restaurant in Manhattan. When he became head of the dynasty in 1994, he did not abandon a royal court to assume the role. He continued the life of a private businessman. The family's experiences resist a simple story of helpless aristocrats descending into poverty. Ordinary employment was not merely evidence of humiliation, it was also how the dynasty survived. Musical training became paid performance, language education opened doors in libraries and international firms, and mobility created new commercial networks. Later generations became professionals, entrepreneurs, writers, and employees in the countries where they were raised. Some achieved stability, while others struggled. What united them was not a single economic condition, but the disappearance of the guarantee that ancestry alone would provide a livelihood. That transformation explains why leadership of the dynasty carries no automatic income today. Harun Osmanoglu did not inherit an imperial treasury, and the next head of the family will not acquire one either. Every descendant must obtain education, build a career, manage property, or depend upon the same private resources available to other citizens. The dynasty survived because its members learned to separate identity from employment. They could preserve the memory of being Osmanoglus while working as musicians, librarians, salesmen, laborers, or businessmen. The empire ended when the state withdrew its recognition. The family continued, because ordinary work made life after royalty possible. 6. The Ottoman name as cultural and political capital. The Ottoman dynasty lost its throne, palaces, and constitutional authority, but it retained something valuable, a name recognized across much of the world. In the 21st century, that name can attract television audiences, book readers, social media followers, and invitations to political or cultural events. A person introduced as a descendant of an Ottoman sultan enters the conversation with a historical importance that an ordinary surname cannot provide. This attention does not restore royal power, but it creates cultural capital. And wherever a famous identity has value, disputes emerge over who possesses the right to use it. The value of the name has increased alongside renewed interest in the Ottoman past. Historical television dramas, palace tourism, museum exhibitions, and political references to imperial achievements have made the dynasty newly visible. Some descendants write novels or memoirs, participate in documentaries, give interviews, or support cultural and charitable organizations. Their family connection offers a personal route into history. Audiences are not simply hearing about Abdulhamid II or Murad V, but listening to someone presented as their descendant. That intimacy can be compelling, even when the speaker is discussing events that occurred generations before his or her birth. Yet the surname Osmanolu does not by itself prove descent from the imperial house. The word means son of Osman, and variations of it can be used by people with no genealogical connection to the former ruling family. After the introduction of surnames in Republican Turkey, the dynasty's descendants adopted Osmanolu because it preserved their association with the House of Osman, but the name was never reserved as an exclusive legal trademark of royalty. A passport, business card, or social media profile displaying the surname therefore establishes a modern identity, not an unbroken line to a sultan. Even genuine descent contains important distinctions. Traditional membership in the Ottoman dynasty generally followed the male line. Sons of princes were shehzads, while particular titles applied to daughters and other female descendants. But many people can truthfully descend biologically from an Ottoman ruler, through women without belonging to the dynastic succession under the old house rules. One person may say, "I am a descendant of a sultan," as a genealogical fact, while another interprets the phrase as a claim to formal membership in the imperial house. Both may be discussing real ancestry, but they are making different claims about what that ancestry means. Establishing the connection requires records rather than appearance, surname, or personal confidence. Historians compare palace registers, birth and marriage records, exile lists, family documents, published genealogies, and modern civil records. These sources can trace a person from a recognized prince or princess through successive generations. No Turkish ministry currently grants certificates of Ottoman nobility, however, because the Republic does not recognize an active imperial estate. Authentication is therefore historical and genealogical rather than constitutional. The evidence may identify a descendant, but it cannot transform that person into a legally privileged prince. Representation creates another problem. Harun Osmanolu is regarded by dynastic tradition as head of the House of Osman, but he does not control every descendant or authorize every public statement made under the family name. Different branches were raised in Turkey, Europe, the Middle East, and the Americas, developing distinct languages, careers, and political opinions. Some relatives are highly visible online, while others remain private. A charitable association may represent its members, and an author may represent her own branch, but neither automatically speaks for the entire dynasty. The family has a senior figure without possessing a unified royal communications office. These ambiguities become more serious when the Ottoman name is used to gain followers, sell products, solicit money, or claim political importance. In 2025, members of the family publicly challenged a US-based social media personality using the name Sina Osmanolu. Family representatives stated that he did not appear in their genealogical records and announced plans for legal action. The dispute illustrates the modern stakes without requiring the Republic to decide who is a prince. Relatives can argue that their family identity is being misrepresented, while any legal case would concern matters such as identity, reputation, or deception, not the recognition of an Ottoman throne. Authenticity, however, does not settle every question. A documented descendant can still offer inaccurate history, pursue personal commercial interests, or express political views rejected by other relatives. Conversely, a scholar with no Ottoman ancestry may understand the empire better than someone born into the family. The name provides access, visibility, and emotional authority, but not automatic expertise or a mandate to speak for Turkey. This is why the battle over representation matters. The dynasty's remaining power lies largely in its symbolism. With no throne to control, the most contested inheritance may be the right to define what Ottoman means in the present. 7. Does the family actually want the empire back? If the House of Osman were preparing to restore the monarchy, the evidence should be visible. There would be a declared claimant, a political organization, a constitutional proposal, public campaigning, and an effort to build support inside Turkey. Instead, Harun Osmanolu lives as a private citizen, while the family's most visible activities involve ceremonies, historical memory, publishing, and charity. The absence of a restoration movement does not mean that every descendant holds the same opinion. It means that the dynasty, as a collective body, is not behaving like a royal house actively attempting to recover political power. The family is too large and dispersed to possess a single political worldview. Its members were raised in Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, France, Britain, the United States, and other countries. Some are religiously conservative, others more secular. Some speak frequently about Ottoman history, while others avoid public attention. Even Harun's position as head of the house does not allow him to determine what every relative believes. Asking whether the family wants the empire back, therefore risks treating dozens of individuals as if they were members of a disciplined political organization. They share ancestry, not necessarily ideology. For many descendants, Ottoman pride is cultural and personal. It can mean preserving photographs, repeating stories heard from grandparents, visiting ancestral tombs, or objecting when a historical relative is portrayed unfairly. It can also involve using traditional titles in family settings, writing books about exile, or teaching children about their genealogy. None of these actions requires support for monarchy. A person can believe that the Ottoman Empire produced important institutions, architecture, and traditions, while also accepting that modern Turkey is a republic. Remembering an ancestral state is not the same as demanding its return. The distinction becomes harder to see because Ottoman imagery has regained enormous public visibility. Television dramas portray sultans and frontier warriors. Tourists fill restored palaces, and political speeches frequently invoke imperial victories or personalities such as Abdulhamid II. This atmosphere can make a descendant's appearance at a memorial or religious event seem like part of a restoration campaign. But cultural nostalgia is flexible. For some people, the empire represents military strength. For others, Islamic leadership, artistic achievement, or a lost cosmopolitan society. Admiration for any of these images does not automatically translate into support for hereditary government. Active monarchism requires something more specific, the belief that the republic should be replaced or constitutionally reorganized, so that a member of the dynasty becomes head of state. It also requires answering difficult questions. Would the monarch possess real power or perform a ceremonial role? Who would choose him? Which succession rules would apply? How would such a system gain democratic legitimacy? No organized program centered on Harun Osmanoglu has provided those answers. He is described as head of the family, not as the leader of a political party or a government in exile. The conduct of previous family heads also challenges the image of a dynasty waiting for revenge. When Ertuğrul Osman returned to Turkey decades after his exile, he remarked that democracy worked well in the country and rejected the idea that he was seeking restoration. Osman Bayezid, who later headed the family after working for years as a New York librarian, expressed little hostility toward the Republican order, although he remained critical of the harsh conditions under which the dynasty had been expelled. Their positions separated criticism of exile from rejection of the republic itself. Some younger descendants speak more openly about Ottoman pride, religion, or the achievements of particular sultans. Others have pursued legal claims involving property. They argue was personally owned by their ancestors. These actions can be politically charged, but they are not necessarily monarchist. Seeking recognition, compensation, or the return of private property through a republican court means operating within the existing legal system. Likewise, praising Abdülhamid II does not by itself amount to nominating his descendant as sultan. Individual rhetoric must be examined on its own rather than treated as the dynasty's official platform. What many members appear to seek is rehabilitation of the family's place in national memory, not restoration of its former sovereignty. They want the hardships of exile acknowledged, their ancestors discussed with greater nuance, and their connection to Turkish history treated with respect. That is a struggle over reputation, belonging, and historical interpretation. Harun Osmanoglu may symbolize continuity with the imperial past, but he does not command a movement to reverse 1922. The family can preserve the empire as heritage while living inside the republic that replaced it. And that difference is the boundary between Ottoman cultural pride and active monarchism. 8. What survives? When an empire disappears, an empire does not disappear all at once. Its borders may be erased from maps, its offices abolished, and its flags removed from government buildings, yet fragments of it continue inside people. They survive in languages, recipes, buildings, family names, and stories repeated across generations. The Ottoman Empire ended as a political system more than a century ago, but the House of Osman did not vanish with it. Its descendants carried the imperial past into exile, not as rulers preserving a hidden state, but as individuals trying to understand what their family had been and what it could become without power. During the first years of exile, memory traveled in whatever could be carried. Photographs, letters, jewelry, official papers, and a few personal objects crossed borders with families who did not know whether they would ever see Istanbul again. Much was lost, sold, or scattered as money disappeared and relatives moved between countries. What remained acquired greater significance. A photograph was no longer simply an image of a palace gathering. It became evidence of a world inaccessible to the children born in Damascus, Paris, Cairo, or New York. Private possessions became the portable archive of a dynasty without a homeland. Stories performed the same function. Princes and princesses described palace rooms, court ceremonies, family disagreements, and the night they were ordered to leave Turkey. Their children inherited memories of places they had never visited, while grandchildren grew up knowing the empire through voices shaped by nostalgia and loss. These accounts preserve details that official documents may overlook: the emotions of departure, the humiliations of poverty, and the experience of becoming stateless. They turn the dynasty from a sequence of sultans into a collection of human lives disrupted by political transformation. But family memory is not the same as neutral history. Descendants may defend ancestors they believe have been misunderstood. emphasize the suffering of exile, or remember palace life more warmly than people who experienced the empire from outside its ruling household. Their testimony is valuable precisely because it is personal, but it must be compared with archives, scholarship, and the memories of other communities. The Osmanolus preserve one view of the Ottoman past, the perspective of the family that once occupied its center. They do not possess the entire story simply because they inherited its most famous name. Harun Osmanolu embodies this transition between history and memory. He is the great-grandson of Abdulhamid II, yet he was born after both the sultanate and caliphate had disappeared. He grew up in exile, returned to Istanbul as a private citizen, and eventually became head of a house that no longer governs. His importance lies less in what he commands than in what his life connects. The final imperial generation, the poverty and displacement that followed exile, and the descendants now attempting to preserve their identity inside modern Turkey. What survives around Harun is therefore intimate rather than sovereign. It is the order in which family seniority is recognized, the traditional titles relatives use among themselves, the attendance of the eldest member at weddings and funerals, and the responsibility to remember those buried far from home. It is also visible in charitable associations, historical books, interviews, and gatherings that introduce younger generations to one another. These practices do not reconstruct the Ottoman court. They adapt fragments of dynastic identity to the legal and social world of a republic. What does not survive is equally important. Harun cannot issue laws, grant political titles, command soldiers, or demand loyalty from Turkish citizens. No palace belongs to him because he is head of the family, and no government must consult him when choosing its leaders. The distinction between memory and power prevents a historical curiosity from becoming a political fiction. There may be an order of succession, but there is no state office at the end of it. There may be princes by family convention, but there are no subjects required to recognize them. The Osmanolus reveal a larger truth about fallen empires. Political systems can disappear faster than the identities built around them. Descendants inherit pride mixed with trauma, privilege remembered alongside dispossession, and a famous name that can open doors while inviting suspicion. Their challenge is not to govern the territories their ancestors lost. It is to decide which parts of that inheritance deserve preservation, which myths require examination, and how a family once identified with absolute power can find a place among ordinary citizens. The living heir to the Ottoman throne, therefore, does something both smaller and more enduring than ruling. He helps carry a memory. Harun Osmanolu is not waiting for an empire to return. He stands at the quiet end of a 6th-century dynasty, surrounded not by ministers and guards, but by relatives, photographs, and stories. And if you want to continue exploring what happens to rulers, borders, and ordinary people after empires collapse, subscribe to the channel, because history rarely ends when the throne disappears.